So our forefathers were very familiar with democracy, and they wrote in their memoirs, quite a few of them, about the word democracy. They used words like volcanic, they used words like destructive, licentiousness, and of course, it was also said too that they didn't know democracy, they didn't commit suicide. So they clearly knew that democracy didn't work because it eventually shoots into a monarch, which was also something that was heavily said and spoke about. So, you have to kind of take that into an effect that we need to stop using the word democracy because words matter. So one of the things that we don't do here in the state of California that as a governor, I'm going to ensure that we reinforce it is the Constitution, and the state Constitution needs to be taught throughout all educational levels. That means even if you go to college, that needs to be one of your criterias all the way to you get your bachelor's degree. You need to be informed. You need to understand just how powerful you really are as a people, because again, you are above government at all times. Your status is always above government, and people need to realize this, and they need to understand that even in the California State Constitution, under Article 1, Section 3, it says that the people have the right, didn't say privilege, have the right to instruct and consult their representatives. That means representatives are there to ensure that when they are being expressed redress of grievances, they have to adhere to them. Why? Because it's the will of the people. That's how this works. So again, but they have reversed these roles, and we are under the impression that government is more powerful than the people. And the Declaration of Independence is clear that we to endure such tumultuous times of tyranny, that we have a right to abolish that tyranny. And remember the word abolish, but a lot of people don't understand what that means. Abolishment basically means it's a time where people are going to have to engage in some sort of civil uprising. What does that look like? I mean, technically we are at war. The only thing that we haven't engaged in just yet is an arsenal war, in the kinetic sense. When you look at, are we in an educational war? Absolutely. Are we in a parental rights war? 100%. Are we in an open borders war? Yes. There's so many wars going on all fronts. We are getting worn down. And I believe firmly it has to do with the fact that we've also removed God out of our lives, which our forefathers, wrote the Declaration of Independence as a new covenant with God. They were just very distinctive about it. They knew who they were talking about. They even write it in their memoirs. Washington's one of my favorites, where he says that if you adhere to the teachings of Jesus, you will have a better life. Hamilton said almost the exact same words in similar phrases. And Adams, also, they all write that, our Constitution argument is for moral and religious people. They were specifically writing to create a new covenant with God. And, one of my favorite verses is when you read in Hosea, it says that my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. But everybody sort of stops right there. They don't keep reading. You keep reading that verse, it does say, I'm paraphrasing, that my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And because you've forgotten the laws of thy God, I will also forget your children. Well, what's happening with our children right now? They're completely being forgotten. We're indoctrinating them in school. We're over-sexualizing them in school, allowing for other people to take control of the actual biological parents that the laws of nature provided. When man and woman consummated, that child belongs to those two individuals who created that new DNA, that new life. That life belongs to them, and it is their responsibility to upbring that child. Not government. Government didn't have anything to do with that consummation. This is where government comes in and starts to infringe upon the right of the parents, which again are written in the Declaration of Independence, which again is a legal document. So why aren't we adhering to this? Because we have a bunch of ignorant people who don't read, who don't study, who've never done it, who engage in trying to run for office because they are running on an emotional roller coaster because they think they can pull on the heartstrings people. But there are so many people that are uneducated to this, that they think they're putting somebody in office that they think have the right intentions. Well, the problem is that if you've never read the California State Constitution or even studied the current Constitution, right? How do you know what to ask if you don't know what to ask? How do you know that the individuals that are your representatives are actually engaging in egregious behaviors if you really don't know the laws? If you really don't know the Constitution, you don't understand us as authorities, well, then you're barking up the wrong tree because they know you don't know. But the second they find out that you do is the second. I know several groups who dig down deep and they ensure that they go line item by line item when it comes to expenditures in city. When they find out that some of their local law enforcement are acting out of professionalism and they're engaging in crime, when their legislators at the city level are passing bills that are cunningly coercing the local um, constituents out of their ability to engage in prosperity with flourishing with their businesses. They're making it harder for them to buy a home and so on. If you don't know this, then you're going to fall prey to this. But I know of only a handful of cities, groups, patriot groups that don't define themselves as, necessarily Republican or Democrat, but as constitutionalists, people who love this country and know the laws. That's how it's supposed to be.
That is how it's supposed to be. And what is there a party label or independent? What are you running under for California technically?
I'm running under as a Republican. That doesn't agree with the Republican Party. I mean, I think the old saying is they're two wings of the same bird, and I see a lot of dissension in the Republican Party. They are definitely back ending the people in the way where a lot of people don't know that the Republican Party works in unison and coalesces with the DNC in order for them to fundraise. This is why they are predominantly in support of how much money a candidate can raise. They're not really in support of a candidate's constitutional understanding, the name of the character of the candidate, and they don't pay attention to major flags of any other candidate. They simply just focus on, well, how much money can you raise? Because, well, it takes a lot of money to run. No, it doesn't. Not as much as people think. And I speak from experience because I've been going up and down the state of California for the last few years now. I started back in 2019 when I ran for Congress. And when the race ended in March of 2020, I knew exactly where, because I was exposed to all the corruption and how the corruption works. And I started exposing this. And I realized the seat that's the key to all the issues here is the seat of governor. There's no other seat that I have any interest in. I'm not going to run for a lower position. I've gone around, like you said, well, how do people find out about this? I've been to over 250 cities now. I've been to all 58 counties multiple times. And I did it by way of my own dime, on my own time. And I didn't do it with your money, right? I didn't do it with your hard-earned effort. I did it because I love this state and because I'm actually providing information that helps those local regions fight back, not just at the state level, but at the federal and the local level, by giving them tools of the things that I have dug up. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about the dubious oath of office here in the state of California with a group down in Palmdale and putting on a PowerPoint presentation. So it's not just me coming there saying, hey, here I am running for governor. It's me saying, here, listen, here's some information for you so that you can continue to use to fight back and really make it difficult for these individuals who have lied to you, who have stolen from you, who have swindled from you. And it's because this is my state too, right? If I don't win, well, at least I left you with something. So much so that I even wrote a book about it where corrupt government hides and operates, why and how they're getting away with what they're doing, and how everything ties into the Bible and biblical prophecies, more so for the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And I've given out over 1,000 free copies to date so far. It's not about the money. It's about trying to take back our state. And I have finally figured out what it means to be in this seat so I can hit the ground running and ensure that the power goes back into the people. So tell people I'm not here to be a governor for the government. I am here to be governor for the people, the people's governor.
That's outstanding, man. That's exactly what we need. I'm curious on a couple things. The first one being, you mentioned politicians, corruption. Could you give us any examples of like crazy corruption that you've seen and what that looks like and means? And then my other question is whether it be politicians or police officers that are basically violating the Constitution, do you think that they're actually intentionally doing that or they're not? Most of them just don't even realize that they're part of a system that's doing that unintentionally.
Well, I mean, one of my favorite representatives who is always engaging in such heinous depravity is Senator Scott Wiener. I think most of us know this individual.
Not
He's
a
part of the
fan.
LGBTQ plus community. Yeah, he's written numerous bills. Of course, my favorite one is SB 145 that he wrote that basically allowed for a 10-year gap between an adult and a minor. Now, if you here in the state of California, we split hairs. So anything from 17 and under, technically, we consider a minor. However, in the state of California, between the ages of 12 to 17 is considered a minor. Anything between the ages, I believe it's 2 to 11 is considered a child, and anything under that is an infant, a toddler and an infant, right? So we split hairs as to how that works. And then, of course, that 10-year gap. So basically, a 24-year-old can have sex with a 14-year-old, or a 21-year-old can have sex with a 11-year-old, right? And
That sounds
basically, what he did
horrifying.
was he removed their ability. He removed their ability to have to register as a sex offender because he said it wasn't fair. Because, well, when you look at the homosexual community, well, when it comes to males, when they have intercourse with another male, it's through sodomy. So the laws here in the state of California, in most states, frown upon sodomy, especially when it comes to a child. And so it's an automatic registration with sex offender
Like it
registration.
should be.
And he said, well, that's not fair, right? Well, wait a second. He didn't level out the laws. He said, wait a second. If a straight male has sex with a female, say he's 22 and she's 12, and he gets her pregnant, he doesn't have to register as a sex offender. Instead, what he said, well, if they don't have to register as a sex offender because, well, that's natural intercourse, then neither should a gay person who has, if a 22-year-old male has sodomy with a 12-year-old male, he shouldn't have to register as a sex offender either. Well, no. So he tried to level out the laws, and that's why they passed SB 145. Rather than saying, listen, if a gay male at 22 has sex with a gay male at 12 and they have intercourse and sodomy, so should also the heterosexual who has sex with a minor. They should also have to register as a sex offender. I'd be all for that bill, right? Because it's, listen, I don't care if you're male or female, or if you have, tendencies, towards, whatever, you're a gay individual. That's irrelevant. Leave the children alone. And if you step across that line, I don't care whether it was heterosexual, vaginal, or anal, it's irrelevant. You all are going to jail. He didn't do that. He leveled it out so that it was permissible for these individuals to engage in this. And not that they might not be charged, but at the same time, they're not really going to go to prison because they can't with SB, I think it was 386, that also separates through tier programs that the individuals who engage in this sort of sexual heinous depravity with children don't necessarily have to go to prison either. They can do a live-out program, or home, whatever, home incarceration, right? And then get checked on by some sort of therapist. But that was divulged and revealed back in 2021 in San Diego, where they found an entire house filled with 5 males who were registered sex offenders living within, I think, less than 1 block, which, down the street from a school, elementary school. And people thought it was strange in the neighborhood, who were these 5 males? And when they started digging up and they were, looking on websites, they found out that they were all sex offenders. And the program pays the city to pay property owners to open up their homes and sort of retrofit it out so they can have multiple people living there who are going through this program under these tiers, to ensure that these sexual predators have a place to live, because it would be too hard for them to live in a prison. So now the taxpayers are not only paying for that house, they're also paying for their living expenses. And they're living right in the middle of a neighborhood where there's an elementary school where they're not supposed to be. So when you ask me, what kind of heinous acts or laws, that's one of them right there. We got, again, SB 144, 386, and a number of other ones too that are coming online. We got AB, what was it, 495 that's coming out right now too. Like,
495.
these laws,
Horrifying bill.
our local law, yeah, our legislators draft between 2,000 and 5,000 bills a year, and over 1,000 of them get signed into law. That is not for your benefit. So when people are
Absolutely
sitting
not.
here saying, how does this keep happening? You can't keep up with that. And it's done on purpose. Then what they do is they repeat the bill numbers too. So AB5 this year was not AB5 last year or the year before, and so on and so forth. They just keep recycling the numbers because it adds confusion. So now you have to know the year. So it's not like they can't come up with a different system. They easily can do it. They just choose not to, because it's a way for you to be confused and confounded. And that's what our current legislative body does at the Democratic level. In fact, California has been in control by the Democrats for the last 50 years. You can't really count the one, cycle where I think it was in 1980 where the Republicans took over for 1 term, 2 years, and then the Democrats took it back. So technically, everything that's gone wrong in the state has always been due to the fact that our state has always had somewhat of a supermajority. So it's really Democrats. The Republicans are inept. They have to lick the boot of the Democrats if they want to get anything done in their district, right? This is unfortunate.
Right.
Now, you asked me about local law enforcement. Yes, there are a lot of local law enforcement that purposely do not engage in trying to prevent or fight against illegal laws. Listen, let's talk about sanctuary laws. You cannot say, I don't support sanctuary laws while you're a law enforcement officer of some kind, whether you're a sheriff or whether you're a deputy or a chief of police, a local PD. It's irrelevant, right? State troopers, you name it. You cannot enforce what is illegal. You cannot enforce what does not harmonize. You cannot enforce what is egregious. Any of those laws that come out, it is a chief executive of the county's responsibility to not enforce it. It's their responsibility to ensure that all laws that harmonize are enforced. So in other words, you don't get to pick and choose laws you want to enforce based off an emotional whim because it doesn't quite fit your narrative. It doesn't work like that. You are required, in fact, you are demanded by your oath of office to not enforce egregious laws. So like SB, I think it's 54, a couple years ago when they enforced that our local law enforcement could not call ICE if there was some sort of, I don't know, a minor infraction of some kind, right? Or misdemeanor. No. If you know that that's not an agreement and they're here illegally, those individuals that are here illegally have no right to due process. It's a fallacy to think otherwise. In fact, there is no court case that says that that is the case. My favorite one that everybody uses is, I think it's Wong Kim Ark. But Wong Kim Ark in the 1800s, mid 1800s, had juris soil, meaning that if a child is born here and is an anchor baby, technically under the 14th Amendment, they have juris soil. But that does not mean that their juris soil transfers over to their illegal alien invading parents. It doesn't work like that. So this is why those children who their child has juris soil, but under the laws of nature belong to the parents, can be deported together as a family. So families under my administration are going to get deported together. You, as a chief executive of a county, have a responsibility to ensure that that is enforced and to cooperate with federal laws, because when you look at the Constitution of the United States, you look at Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, so the uniform of naturalization is what Title 28, Section 13, 24, 25, and 26 were built off of, which means it's an agreement. So then when you have state law that says, SB 54, sanctuary, that's not agreement. You can't enforce it. You are bound by oath through your oath that you actually signed a contract. That contract, right, the oath of office here in California under Article 20, Section 3, which means you say up the top, I do solemnly swear to uphold and defend the Constitution. That comes first. Why? Because that is the supreme law of the land. Therefore, you have to enforce what is an agreement. Anything that else is repugnant, you as a chief executive, which here in California, it's our sheriffs, they're the sovereign of the county. Why? Because they're the oddity to the Constitution and state constitution. Why? Because they're voted in by the people. They can't just be removed, right? They have to be removed by either a criminal act that causes harm, or they can be voted out, or they can be recalled, right? This is how this works. So they can't be fired. So they have every authority to push back to the governor. I don't push back to the governor because the governor controls the militia, right? The Air National Guard, and he's the chief executive. And a lot of our sheriffs, unfortunately, have engaged in what's called a buyout. The buyout basically means that they are allowing themselves to be paid an exorbitant amount of money funded by way of the city through the taxpayers, where their pay or their salaries now are anywhere between $400,000 and $700,000 a year. That's more than the president of the United States. They're not going to rock the boat. Wow. And it behooves them to not investigate the machines. Why? Well, because why would you get rid of the machines? You're basically asking yourself to work yourself out of a job. You're not going to do that, right? And a lot of these illegal aliens vote because it inflates the vote roll. So the machines can be tainted. And then the state came up with a law that says, well, they can only investigate 1% if there's any foul play. 1%? That's nothing. That's absolute nothing. So, of course, you're not going to get rid of the machines. It keeps them in power. It keeps them in office. Right?
Yeah, I don't understand what the point of a bill
so
like
this
that
is where
would
we're
even
at.
be.
It's to prevent any deep investigation of foul play when it comes to the machines being rigged. This is why a lot of people are against it, because Dr. Douglas Frank, he's already been up and down. I've sat down and I've had lunch with him. He has proven through state by state by state and a number of other people how you can hack the machines. So when he's brought in this data and he's proven it, and he's been able to show by example how this functions, he has proven without a shadow of a doubt that we need to get rid of the machines. And he's proven how they can do that. Basically, all sheriff needs to do is somebody puts in one complaint, well, he has to adhere to the state constitution under Article 2, which is about voting, and I think it's Article 2, Section 2, that says all votes must be counted, and it counts for, right? So and I'm paraphrasing here, well, if somebody comes in and says, hey, somebody, my vote, or somebody voted for me, Now an investigation immediately has to happen underway that day. They have to shut down the machines. Then you tag it to a court ticket. Then that hangs it up in courts. So what does the county do? The county can't use another machine. They have to go back to counting. This is why your sheriffs don't want to do this, because again, they're going to have to fight back with their deals they've got going on. And then we also have sheriffs who are also part of the California bar. Well, a lot of people don't know, and I'm sure you do, maybe you do, but what does bar stand for? British
I'm not
Accredited
sure. Something to do with
Registry.
attorneys. What was that?
Yeah, so it stands for British Accredited Registry.
That's what all of our attorneys are.
So if
For
you're
some reason,
part of the
British.
American bar, yes. So then you're saying you're part of the American British Accredited Registry Association. Hey, you can't serve two masters and you can't serve under two different jurisdictions. Why do lawyers have to serve under a British registry? Because they're not serving law, the Constitution or American law, they're serving the Crown. This is why they exploit the Constitution under the contract clause. And this is why everything is under tort, right? It has to do with tort. This is why we have courts of equity and not courts of record. This is the problem that we have. So a lot of people are unaware that some of our sheriffs are also California bar members. What you can't, that's two different jurisdictions. You don't get to sit here and say, I'm an executor and I'm part of the judicial branch. It doesn't work that way. You can't be an officer of the court in that capacity, right? And yet here we are, we have this. So again, there's different kinds of loyalty going on in this state. And, it's taken me years to dig a lot of this up and figure it out and why we're enduring what we're enduring. This is why, right? There's so many rabbit holes. But somebody like me, I'm ready to hit the ground running, and I'm sure that this is all going to end. And again, there's nothing that they can do about it. I know exactly how to push back. I know exactly how to put them in place and how to remove them from their seat. This is what we require. And I tell people, if you don't want that, don't vote for me. I'm not going to pander. But don't say that somebody didn't come out there and say, it's time to put these people in prison. It's time to hold these people accountable. And it's time for them to step down from positions. If you don't want that and you want someone to negotiate, then all you're going to get is a few bones. You're going to rob Peter to pay Paul. And they're going to be right back to business as usual.
Wow. I mean, I think it would be spectacular to see you actually take initiative and holding people accountable. That's what we need to save California. You brought up, the whole sanctuary laws. So I'm curious what you think
Yes.
about not the illegal immigration one, but the fact that California is a trans sanctuary state, meaning kids can be kidnapped from other states and taken to California, where they will take emergency, jurisdiction over the custody of the child, and then you use taxpayer, or unless the parent's doing it, money to transition these kids, give them hormones, surgeries, etc., which I think is horrifying and wrong. And we've seen
Yes.
examples of it, like the Jeff Younger case, disobeying a Texas order, but I don't know, I guess Texas never did anything about it, and California let the mom flee to California in spite of, an order from Texas. I think that's a little odd.
So the fact of the matter is, it's very simple. The sanctuary laws allow exactly what you're talking about. Same with open borders. It allows for the proliferation of child sex trafficking, weapons trafficking, drug trafficking, and so on, because there's no protocol to ensure that checks and balances are heavily in place. It's really that simple. So when we come up with laws like AB 495, it continues this business, this heinous ring to continue to grow, to profit, right? When it comes to child sex trafficking, I've already did the research. I have a video up on all my social media sites. It's roughly garners now it's even more. I think it's $150 billion a year of an underground profiteering off of the misery of these poor little children that they indoctrinate, that they use for rituals, for sex, and of course for whatever when it comes to their sexual organ mutilation and hormone blockers to try to transition these kids. So it's a legal way of kidnapping these children, and it is by way of our own government. And because again, there's profit to be made because of who's really in charge. And this is what people don't want to see. They don't want to hear it. It sounds very conspiratorial, but yet they scream as to the fact of, how did the laws pass? Does that mean that AB 495 is going to be able to take my kid? Yes. And here's the
It
thing,
says,
there's loopholes
any
that
18-year-old can sign an affidavit and take temporary custody of a minor. That's insane.
Yes. And this is This is why I can tell you how many parents I talk to, and when I start telling them about some of these bills that are being, put out to the floor egregiously, illegally, they're blown away, and they don't know what to do about it because they never heard about it. And I said, well, how often do you participate in local government? They don't, and that's because they're so inundated. Nobody wants to come home and say, hey, love, can you grab me the bills that have been passed or that are on the floor for us to read? There's 1,500 this quarter. Let's start reading. Who has time for that? You don't. This is why they're able to kind of play around with the legal language. This is why also, the whole pronoun came into place, right? It was a way to disrupt the Constitution. And how so? Because it was changing the language, change perception by disrupting linguistical canons, meaning that our courts adhere to the meaning of a word in a phrase at the time it was first adopted in order for them to have the highest level of context. So when they change that, it disrupts linguistical canons. So now they can have a field day with legislation. And now they can start, finding more legal loopholes so that they can continue to draft and proliferate all of these business deals and dark-ended business deals, and to continue this profiting. We have a lot of snakes that are operating behind the walls of our government institutions, and nobody wants to really, put a microscope to that, because they may find out that they actually put somebody in office that they thought was, aces in the hole, and turned out that they're nothing more than a pervert. And yet here we stand, where now we're having to fight, tooth and nail for parental rights and children and the innocence of a child. This should not be so difficult to fight, and yet it is. People like Scott Wiener of the bunch. And here we are. You put me in office, this will end overnight.
I would love to see that. I mean, there's just been so many crazy bills we've dealt with. I stood up against AB 957, which was instructing family courts, to basically give custody to the quote affirming parent of a child's gender identity or expression. I told them all, including the author, Lori Wilson, supporter, Scott Wiener. I was like, well, if this bill passes, just for my particular situation, I was like, my son says he's a boy, and I'm affirming that he's a boy. So if his mom pretends that he's non-binary, I should win custody. I should be the first person to win custody because of your bill, right? And the author not reluctantly, she acted like, yeah, that should be how it is. If like someone's going to try to force that on a kid, I don't really believe that that's how it would have worked in practice, because almost every case I know of where there's a custody battle and gender's involved, the parent that's aligned with reality and biology seems to always lose custody. And thankfully that
Yeah,
bill
it's
did pass, but
unfortunate
Newsom
because
vetoed it, actually, which was pretty crazy.
so yeah, that was AB 957 or AB 953?
957, yeah.
957. I actually wrote about that in my book. Here's the reason why he vetoed
Nice.
it, and you actually just brought it up in a beautiful manner. If a child says or claims that, yeah, I'm transgender, or I'm not a boy, I'm a girl, and they're biologically a male, and one parent affirms that that child is a female, even though they're born biologically male, and affirming that, the affirmity only reflects or recognizes transgenderism under the LGBTQ plus flags, right? Under that community, it does not recognize heterosexual. However, if the heterosexual parent who is not in agreement because they clearly see with their own eyes, and of course biologically, anatomically, and chromosomally, they're identifying this, my child is born male, and all of these are the identifying factors. That parent was intelligent like you and went a number of ways. One of them being saying, well, I choose not to affirm or deny. What does the court do? Nothing. Because silence is not an admission of guilt or confirmation or denial, right? You have the right to remain silent. I choose not to answer that question. Well, you have to know the court's going to compel you.
Hold on. I love what you're saying, but family court's not exactly a real court, and there's not things like, innocent until proven guilty, or the things you're mentioning. I was forced to break
you're
HIPAA
right.
law
That's
in
why
one
I'm
of my
saying.
trials, so I don't know. But
But that
conceptually,
was my point, is
yeah.
that if you decide, well, I'm not going to confirm or deny, the family court can't control a parent's behavior and then utilize that as an admission of guilt or a denial or a confirmation or lack thereof. What that does was, what I'm telling you is that Gavin Newsom kicked it on the line was because if a smart parent went that path and said, well, I'm not going to confirm or deny, then it leaves the court hanging, and the court then have to go back to what? original family court code that can't enforce that bill. That's why they didn't sign it, because it wasn't ironclad. So it didn't function the way that they needed. They needed to do exactly what you said, which was they needed the parent to feel compelled. And if a parent was smart enough to go, well, I don't have to compel, and this has no effect on whether or not I'm a good parent or a bad parent, and I should have parental rights or custody of my child or shared custody, then it removes the law is a null void, it's negated. So what do they do? They have to go back to the original codes, and now we're back to two parents disputing on, who's the better caregiver and how much custody each parent should have. That's why he denied the bill. That's why he didn't sign it. Was exactly what you were talking about. Was you asked the question, well, what if I confirm my child who is saying he's a boy, and I affirm that, right? Affirm didn't go along with heterosexual; it only aligned with the LGBT community, but it was biased. So this is what a lot of people were picking up on, and that's why Gavin Newsom did not sign off on the bill. It wasn't because he saw the light.
Yeah. It was still awesome to, just see that was a possibility. But yeah, it's true. I was using their own words against them. Like you said, words have meaning and are important. And that's how their bill was written. So I
And
would
you
have
knew
loved to
enough.
have been the first
You
person.
knew enough to be like, well, I'm going this. Yeah, you knew totally enough to be like, well, I'm going down this path. I'm going to confirm he's a boy, so I affirm he's a boy. They didn't like
But
that. That's why
right. But I'm
conceptually.
also lucky because unfortunately a lot of kids, it tends to be moms, but dads too. But a parent is going to withhold love from them or
Yeah.
tell them something over and over. They'll end up believing them. It's really sad that people are doing that to their children. I'm lucky Sawyer's a rebel like me, and I'm just thank God every day.
No, and I'm, it's sad to see this because it goes on quite a bit. I have a lot of friends who are in the middle of divorce right now, and one of the parents is completely in support of hormone blockers, even though their child is only 8 years old. They haven't even hit puberty, and they haven't even figured out once they hit puberty what are all these hormones. Like, I have a teenager right now, I have a 13-year-old. And he's a typical teenage boy. He's got reaching hormone. He's overtly aggressive. He's completely, emotionally out of whack. Why? Because he's starting to come into his own. He's starting to get that facial hair. He's starting to have broad shoulders. His voice is deepening. He's, we're a grappling family. Do a lot of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and he's
Nice,
more aggressive, verbally. Like, he's now dealing with these emotions. He's starting to understand what's happening down when it comes to his testicles, right? He's really being like, and I know this is TMI, but it's like, hey, all dads have to go through this, and he's like, Dad, what's going on down here, right? This is the early stage of, Dad, I don't understand all these emotions. Like, what's going on with me? Like, why do I have hair? Like, he's really like, I got hair on my chest, or what is this? Like, he's discovering all these things. So even when a kid hits puberty, they have a whole more years to kind of figure out as they continue to progress into maturity. You cannot inhibit that. Government has no right or authority to inhibit the behavior of the people, meaning that government wasn't granted that authority, right, to control the behavior of the people. It's outside their range. This is why when they told us to mask up, stand 6 feet apart, and so on, this all had to do with control the behavior. That is not the authority of the people, relevant to the courts. The courts have no authority to say, well, you have to take a shot. You have to take hormone blockers. No, you don't.
Well,
but it's an abrogation.
But both parents have the right to be a parent, right? So
yes,
when they don't agree, full out, 50-50, one wants to affirm a delusion, one wants to live in biological reality. What do we do in that scenario since both parents have a right to their child?
So then it has to come down to exactly what you said, biological reality. What is the reality, not the delusion? Reality actually aligns with the Constitution. The Constitution is based off of laws of nature. So the laws of nature have to be adhered to. This is why the courts utilize the Declaration of Independence. Why? Because they have to make sure that when they're about to set precedents, that it aligns harmoniously with the supreme law of the land. So you have to go back to what is innate. That's why our forefathers wrote in there, and they write about this too, because they understood that his laws, meaning God's laws, were written in the hearts of men, and that there were an order and structure to nature. So the structure to nature is your chromosomes. That's nature. So the courts are forced, if not demanded, to adhere to that construct first, not the delusion.
I'm glad to hear that. I unfortunately think a lot of judges tend to, in California go with the delusion, unfortunately. But I do think that every child has the right to
Yeah.
puberty, for sure.
Yes. Yes, 100%. That is the laws of
Yeah,
nature. Puberty is nature. Once they are finished, hey, what they do as an adult, up to them. They're an adult. They can decide for themselves. The minute they turn 18, that's out of the parents' hands. They're legally an adult. They can do whatever. We can't say anything
I
about
think
it.
I
And
like
we all, as parents,
21
hope to God.
more, but
Yeah,
I get what you're
uh,
saying.
yeah.
Just because it's such a big thing, it's like it can take
Absolutely.
away your ability to have kids for your whole life. Like, do you really know it at 18? Like, I don't think I was mature enough to understand that at 18.
Oh, no.
Um,
I don't think I was mature
but
enough even when I was in the military. I was just barely hitting maturity. I was, 23 when I jumped in, and I was still wet behind the ears and, I had so much more to learn and, I had yet to see the world. I grew up really, really fast as soon as I joined in the military, so it's one of those things where just because you get out of college doesn't mean you're ready to hit the ground running. You just got a higher education. That was it. That doesn't mean you're intelligent. The two are not one and the same. This is now they got to go out and live life. And puberty blockers is one of the last thing you want because all it's going to do is mess that up with their hormones, their chemical imbalances, and then wonder why there's a high level of suicide rate when it comes to the transgender community. It's because chemically they're imbalanced.
yeah, exactly. And it does not go down when you affirm it. It debatably even goes up slightly. But so
Yes.
you grew up in California, and
Yes.
I'm curious, what was your life like growing up in California? I feel like you grew up during the golden age. I'd love to hear how you grew up, how you got to these more constitutional conservative values, and what your military experience was like more, and how that shaped you, and how all of this shaped you to become the man you are today.
I grew up in the 80s. I was born in the 70s. I was raised in the 80s. I guess you could say I partied in the 90s. I grew up, yeah, I would say it was the golden era. I'm mid Gen X. We were the last generation, feral kids who knew what it was like to grow up without tablets. We're the last generation to know what it's like to be as free as we were. We rode our bikes, through multiple cities and towns, all hours of the night, and our clock to come home was streetlights. We knew where everybody lived or was at or hanging out at. We saw skateboards and bicycles and scooters in front of one of the kids' neighborhood's homes. That's how we knew where everybody was at. And if we got bored, we went down to the local park and we brought our bat. We brought a football. We brought some roller skates. We brought whatever we thought anybody else would bring, and then we would play that game. And we would play again until the sun would set and streetlights would come on. That was how I grew up. And we would take care of each other, really. I mean, kids were left alone quite a bit. In fact, the kids were cherished, but we were also, you had to be seen and not heard, right? So you made sure that when you're home, that's how, you didn't talk unless you're spoken to. And it was hard. You had to figure things out for yourself. And so we did. We were a generation of having to figure things out all on our own. We experimented greatly with our bikes, doing jumps and ramps. And when it came to education, we had to deal with the libraries and the Dewey Decimal stuff where, there was no just typing it up on an iPhone or a pad or tablet. It was, we had to go to the card stock, we had to go up and down different angles of the library. We had to understand how it all functioned. And it was a really, really great time. It was a time that, I miss great here because it's something that I wish my children could have, and not have to deal with what we're dealing with now. When you went to school, you were simply taught math, English, history, arithmetic, biology, anthropology, so on, right? There were no indoctrination. We never knew anything about our teachers except for they were the teacher of that subject matter and whether or not we liked them or not, or the sports that you did. We always looked forward to Friday night under the lights, right? It was a really tremendous time, and yeah, I could say it was a golden age. But I'd like for our state to get back to that, and children were number one. Nobody really messed with kids the way they did with the way they do now. Kidnappings were not so grandiose. There was no really child sex trafficking the way it's going on today. Not that it didn't exist then, but it was minimal, and it was hugely frowned upon. Indoctrination, that didn't happen. It was your grade and your reward was your grade. There was no safe spaces, participation trophies. Nobody wanted to be called a pronoun. Girls were proud to be girls and boys were proud to be boys. The more manly that you could be, it was like, the more popular you were to be. And so that was how I grew up. I did grow up in a dysfunctional home. Unfortunately, I had two alcoholic parents, so it made it even more difficult. I had to move around a lot, just because my dad unfortunately couldn't keep. Uh, Not that he couldn't keep a job, but he was, he always had to be the boss, and so we struggled quite a bit. There's a little bit of gambling on his part. He was vulgar, quite vulgar when he was drunk, and physically abusive. But as time went on, my parents divorced, and my siblings were wonderful. They did a lot to protect me. I'm the youngest of four, but when they
I'm
were
one
able
of
to
four
kind of
also.
like stay out of the house, they did. Oh, that's great. So that's probably why I like you.
I was
there's a
sec. I was
there's a
second, but
there's something there. So in this instance, it really kind of, it really makes me go back and think, wish I could provide it to my children. This is partly another reason why I'm here and running for the seats, is to hopefully back to that stage. I know it won't be the same, but there's definitely an element I see that's still kind of on the horizon that we could potentially gravitate towards. And then from there, I wasn't the greatest intelligent kid. I struggled through school. I had a bit of learning curve, and it wasn't until I joined the military, and I had a buddy of mine, a roommate, who was in the barracks with me, and he saw me struggling when I was reading the NATOPS manual, which is one of it's a big, thick Bible-looking manual that you have to memorize everything about that helicopter that you're flying in case you crash land. You have to fix it yourself. You're doing search and rescue, and something goes down, you've got to know how to repair it. You're the repairman, so you've got to know a lot, and you have to fly it. Even though I wasn't a helicopter pilot, I had to know what the pilots could and could not do. I had to understand, pitch it away. I had to understand how to control the hover grip and a lot of other things. So he looked at me and he goes, "What are you struggling with?" And I said, "I just can't digest this information." He goes, "Oh, you never learned how to learn." And a light bulb went on in my head. Learn how to learn. And I realized we never teach children how to learn first, as how their brain functions. We always teach them how to try to just do things in a repetitive nature over and over and over until they get it right. And once he kind of broke it down with me, we sat down one night. He basically just showed me how my brain functions, and I found out I was a nonlinear learner, and I had to do things out of sequence in order for me to retain the information. Once I did that, I went back to college. When I came out of the military, A's and B's. It was easy for me. Now studying is simple. It's easy. I retain information, unlike I've ever been able to retain it, and I know how to stay focused. I know where to start. When I want to find something, information, I might get a book about it. I go right to the source that I'm looking for. Then I go back and I start reading the entire book because now my interest is piqued, and I figured out how to do that. And this is what I try to do with my kids. Try to find areas of the subject matter that interest them first, and then make them go back, and then they start retaining it. And even my son, he's homeschooled. He took a state test. He was seventh grade. He scored at the 11th grade level in math, and he's already in pre-cal, but he's homeschooled. Right. And so this is one of the things where it's like you can figure out your kid's brain. But yeah, I joined the military. I served 2 tours, 3 operations. I served and watch Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom. I have about 1,000 hours of no-ship missions under my belt and serving in a war zone. And then when I came back, went to school, eventually as time went on, I created my own independent production company. I started also a private investment group that I actually just, closed down. Now a partnership has disbanded. Now everybody's kind of happy. They figured out how to deal with cryptocurrencies, and so now they're making their own money. And that was kind of the point of this partnership that I had. And then, I work in production and the health and wellness industry. I create a lot of digital ads on social media, and do a lot of post-production and producing. And then, of course, I met my wife. I proposed here, have 3 kids. They're all homeschooled. And as things kind of went on, I'm also dealing with, unfortunately, a corrupt government didn't want to clean up mess where I live at, where I live near the Santa Susana laboratory that was basically California's Chernobyl. They never cleaned it up for the last 65 years. And my daughter when we moved here, was quickly diagnosed with leukemia. So she is battling that right now. And a big group came to me and they said, we knew you ran for office before, and we know you're running again. We want to bring more information to you, as to what the government did to kind of cover this up, kick the can down the road, and did nothing clean up the mess, taint the water. And of course, there's a huge profit margin for the medical community. For every kid that comes in with leukemia, there's an exorbitant amount of money that goes to the hospital. Luckily, my daughter is coming out of the woodworks. She's not done yet. She's got about a month more to go, but it's been about a 2.5 year journey, and she has one of the most curable. And I always say, if this is the most curable of leukemia for children, I would not wish this on my worst kids and my worst enemy's kid. Not even close. It is, horrendous. It's a nightmare. It's every day, nonstop, and it was, I believe that it was caused by this laboratory that um, when the spill happened, they never cleaned it up. In fact, there was 2 nuclear reactors, and the big one happened in '65. And then I think it was 10 years later, another one went, and 5 of them went off in 10-year increments. And then when the Woodley fire happened here, it burned up the remaining kickball, that old stuff over by the laboratory, which I'm within the 5-mile radius. And I remember when we moved here, I remember my pool was black, and it took me weeks to clean it all out and siphon the water and all that kind of stuff. And I think that is what, when you talk about how do kids get leukemia, nobody in my family has it, and neither of my wife's. One of the doctors said it is by way of either toxic ingestion or inhalation or through exposure on the skin. So now I go
Wow.
around my home with a Geiger counter and make sure that there's no radiation levels, which there's been a few where I've had some leaks,
You had it beep?
and I've had to, oh yeah, because the wind carries stuff, because I'm in the valley. And so it's all over the area. We're around farmlands, so it gets into the food, it gets into the water, it gets into the land on any of the greenery. And so I make sure. So now we had to retrofit my house out with reverse osmosis, which is one of the few things that you can do to ensure that you're not drinking any radiation. It's one of the few things to ensure that it actually can get rid of that stuff. But it's expensive. I'm going to do what I have to ensure that my child stays alive and stays healthy. And so we're getting close to figuring out if we're going to retrofit out the entire house, that we're no longer like bathing in it. We're bathing in reverse osmosis water. But it's funny is the people around my neighborhood are always like, yeah, don't drink the water. And they kind of laugh about it, but they've lived here their whole life. And the town that I live in has some of the highest rates of number of kids who have been diagnosed with leukemia. I've been to some of the high schools and talked to the teachers, and they almost every year have a kid in their class. So it's almost like every class has a kid who has leukemia. And that's not coincidental without a cofactor. And so this has really invigorated me to continue on with running for this office, because doing the Department of Energy, NASA is not doing anything, Boeing, and so on. All the people who own this land aren't doing anything about it. So this invigorates my fight.
Well, I'm praying for your daughter, man. That's crazy. I didn't know that there was
Thank you.
even a spill like that. Yeah, of course. Children are the most amazing, wonderful, innocent amongst us, and they need to be protected at all costs. And when you have a kid yourself, it's really something that you have to do to understand, but it opens your heart to an amount of love you didn't know existed. It transcends everything you thought was awesome before, whether that was music or football or hockey, jiu-jitsu. It is like a million times cooler than all of it. And, just having kids is the best thing you can do, the most meaningful. I love it so much. I just can't believe that we've gotten to a point where like some people are like, oh, I don't know if I want to have kids. I want to like live for me. And like, it's just, that's not the key to a good life, a happy life, a meaningful life.
No,
Having
not
kids
at
is
all.
the
I mean,
best.
again,
It's so
how
cool.
do we
It
live
doesn't
on
hold you back
to the future?
either. That's a lie too. Like, it
No,
doesn't hold you
no, it
back. Like I
actually
just do everything with
motivates me.
Sawyer. It totally does.
Yes. Yeah, it motivates me. My children motivate me. They inspire me. I can already tell one day they're not going to be here, and I'm going to miss all the noise. I'm going to miss all the the fights and the struggles and the laughs and the run around. I'm going to miss all that. I can already tell right now. It's going to negatively affect me. Talking about it, thinking about it. It's like it brings tears to my eye. My wife, the same thing. But you see that. But I'm also proud too, because it's not easy being a dad. It's not easy being a parent. We're constantly always having to look out for our children. I don't understand the mindset of people who want to just take their children down such depravity. It really blows my mind. And really, without our children, there is no future. There really is no future without children, especially if you sit there and one of the things that we're experiencing is Marxism. right? Why are we experiencing Marxism? Marxism, one of the pillars, if you know anything about Karl Marx and Engels, when they wrote the Communist Manifesto and wrote out the pillars of what it would be to live in a society of utopia that they think was by way of communism, one of their pillars was the abolition of family and the abolition of land. They don't want family. They wanted government. Well, when you look at these bills, these are Marxist tactics by way of Fabianism. Fabians were basically people who were communists, who this group were of the mindset of, listen, let's not destroy everything. Let's not destroy the infrastructure. We don't want to burn down buildings. We don't want to blow up the farmlands. We don't want to kill people. Let's do it by way of gradualism. Let's buy out our legislators first. Let's, give them exuberant amounts of money. Let's do it through lobbying. And we won't call it emoluments. It won't be gift giving, and we'll do it through by way of their campaign, and we'll call it a donation. And then when that happens, it keeps them in power. And if we can do it through a business deal and transaction and state like a business, we can slowly but surely start taking control. And well, the structures are still there, and schools are still there, and families still get to buy their homes, and it's still Christmas time, right? It's all this by way of gradualism, but these are Marxist tactics without destroying the infrastructure. And it takes and removes the rights. It removes God and impinges upon parental rights. And of course, it takes children away. It diminishes, just how great they are, and it takes away from our future and the posterity of what we need to provide for them. Right? That future posterity is so important in order for us, you and me, to live on into the future. That's how we do it, by way of our children.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as far as the communism thing, a lot of people call California Commifornia. Do you feel like if you were governor, you could change that?
100%, 100%. It's so easy to do it. It really is. People are like, are you going to get pushback? No, I won't. These people are going to be running for the hills. These people are going to be running. They're going to be turning in, their resignations. When I get into office, they're not going to sit there and try to negotiate with me. They're going to try to either go on the offense, which I'm anticipating, or they're going to do everything they can to step down so that they can't be charged, supposedly. But there's nowhere they're going to be able to run, and they will be charged, and it's going to be swiftly. And it's going to be very, very easy, especially since the judges are not going to be safe either. Everybody thinks that judges are nonpartisan. They're not nonpartisan. They are partisan by way of their oath of office to the Constitution. But again, they engage in lawfare. So they're going to be first on my list. In fact, I can't wait for a judge to come out and try to put an injunction on things that I'm going to do, because I know they're already legal, lawful, and constitutional. That's just going to be the first judge I'm going to make an example out of.
Yeah, that would be good to see. Bring back the Constitution. Do you think that something like term limits, maybe no insider trading, maybe less or no lobbyists would be something that would help the country?
Technically, there shouldn't be any lobby, because again, it's an emolument. So really, lobbying was designed only to express your redress of grievances, because it's a First Amendment right? We have that right to express ourselves to our representatives to ensure that they take care of what's going on negatively in our community, so that they can ensure that our rights aren't impinged upon and that they expand on our freedoms, and there's no business action that's forcing the people to steer in a different livelihood that they don't want to go down. That's the point of a lobbying. But lobbying has come by way of lucre. Right? They come in with a lot of money. They come in with a lot of deals, sweet deals, and that's tied to back-ended, insider trading. This is why our representatives go in making 115 a year, maybe 125 here in California, and then magically somehow they walk out a millionaire. How in the world did that happen off of a $125,000 salary? It doesn't make sense. Insider trading by way of contract and exploitation of the contract clause. Same with the California State Constitution under Article 1, Section 9, by way of exploitation of the contract clause. It's a mirror of the Constitution. But it's the key points of it. And basically means that the states cannot come up with the law to prevent the obligation of a contract. So in other words, it can be completely egregious. The right to contract is not limited. And if that's the case, that means it can be completely egregious. If it's done behind closed doors and both parties are in agreement through that accord, it can be done. And then it's tied to an SBAB bill that then we wonder why some corporations and companies get to continue to flourish during like the lockdown while everybody else is getting shut down. How did that happen? Right? It's all these secret accords because they are tied to the stock market, and whatever trade that they're doing, this is how they get theirs. You're representative, but you have to suffer consequences. No, that's going to end. And yeah, term limits, 100%. In fact, term limits to the point of you only get to run for office once. So choose the seat wisely, because after that, you're done. You don't get the couch hop. You don't get to go from city council to mayor. You don't get to go from mayor to governor. You don't get to go to Senate to assembly or assembly to Senate. You get to be assembly, do 2 terms if you can do that, and then done. That's it. You don't get to be in another office, at least at the state level, and I think it should be like that at the local level, and so on and so forth, right? You don't get to keep couch hopping. And I think that needs to happen too with our local PD. We have a lot of problem police officers who basically precinct hopped. So they're disciplinary cops and deputies who bounce from place to place under my administration. If you've already been disciplined, you're done. Your career is over with. That's it. If you feel like it was unjust, then we're going to have to go through the court. They're going to have to handle it that way, and you need to provide evidence. Other than that, if you've been disciplined multiple times from multiple precincts, including out of state, you're coming into this state and adding to the problem. You're done. Your career's over with. Like, we need to be harder on these people, especially when we expect them to be above reproach, and they're not acting in that way. So we need to narrow down the window. You want to be in this position, you need to be above reproach. You need to understand the Constitution. In fact, we need to make sure that they are constitutionally sound. And if they're not, and you don't get to run for office, you need to be constitutionally sound. And so how do we do this, right? So there's a lot of methods that we can go about to ensure that, again, the point of being in a position of government is the power comes by way of the consent of the governed, the people. So we have to ensure, though, that if you're going to be in that position, you're not going to engage in any sort of fiduciary delinquency and criminal misconduct. And this is what they're doing, and nobody knows what to do about it because no one's being a vet. They're getting away with it. So what's next, right? If we don't do something about it now, then we're never going to solve this problem. It's just going to keep proliferating. Under my administration, it will end. It will end quickly because, again, they've already proven themselves to be criminals. Why would they negotiate with a criminal, right? In my opinion, negotiating with a criminal makes you a criminal. No. What do we do with criminals? Right. So this is why I'm staunch about this. And this is why I tell people, listen, if you want pleasantries, go by way of Steve Hilton, If you want platitudes, go by way of Ted Bianco, right? If you want someone who's going to sit there and tell you the hard ins and outs and you want real solutions, I'm your candidate. But if you're too worried about, people say, yeah, just wants to arrest everybody. That's not true, but let's just go with that as an argument. You want to keep people in office who have lied to you, who have swindled you, who have overengaged in taxation without representation. That's the system you want to keep up. Those people you want to keep in office, don't vote for me. Or if you're ready for this, then I'm your candidate. Support me, donate to me, right? Knock on doors for me, download my flyers, do everything that you can, right? Spread my videos, get people on board with me. Got endorsements, I've got to support. I've got to, campaign fundraisings coming up, right? I'm doing everything that a candidate is supposed to do, but I'm not going to pander, and you can't buy me. That's not going to happen.
I'm glad to hear that. We need people that can't be bought and stand on morals and conviction. I'd like to rapid fire you a few questions that I think are important for California, and then we'll
Sure.
close out, if that's all right. Are you down with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's do this.
Should children be allowed to be transitioned?
No.
Should men be able to compete in women's sports or boys and girls sports, etc.?
No.
What about their changing in their locker rooms or going to the bathroom they prefer?
No, they get to go to the bathroom per their biology and their chromosomes.
Do Californians have a Second Amendment right?
Yes. Californians have an absolute Second Amendment right, and even so much so that a CCW is actually illegal. It's turning right to privilege, and it is, when you look at Miranda versus Arizona, Shuttleworth versus Birmingham, when you look at these court cases, you cannot a right and turn it into a privilege and then or a license and then charge a fee thereof. That's called extortion. So in fact, under my administration, we will be a CCW state.
Sounds like a very important thing for California. Okay. What about a First Amendment? Do Californians have a First Amendment, or should we?
Yes, everybody has a First Amendment right. You have a right to say whatever you want. If you want to say that the sky is falling, that's your right. I have a right to ignore you. I have a right to counter that. What you don't have a right is to engage in physical confrontation. You have a right to do it peaceably. You have a right to do it instructively. You have a right to engage in discourse. You have a right to oppose anybody that you want, provided it's done peaceably. Aside from that, everybody can say whatever they want.
Do you think California is as deep of a blue state as as people pretend it is, or do you think it's more of a purple state? Because I don't meet anyone that, like, when I'm in the Bay Area, which votes pretty blue, and I don't meet anyone that is really against any of the questions I just asked you.
No, I don't believe we're a purple state, and I honestly don't believe in California. We need to go purple before we go red. I believe that California is more conservative as a whole than people would like to admit. I know plenty of Democrats who share very similar convictions that I do. They believe in Jesus. They believe, strength in family. They're all about small businesses because small businesses are the backbone to any strong economy. They believe in freedoms. A lot of the Democrats that I've come across mostly are by way of a Kennedy mindset. Back when Kennedy was running, what he epitomized what the Democratic Party should embody. A lot of them have not let that go. They are not in support of this sort of this wokeism, and they are not in support of how the left or the Democrats have really negatively degraded our state. They want to get back to living in prosperity. They are confused and conflicted with this Trump terrain syndrome and hating him, but not really understanding why. And when you take the time to slow down with these individuals and you get them first to listen, not by way of the party, but by way of they're convicted with, you start to break down barriers. And I believe firmly that California is much more conservative than most of us would like to admit, which I guess would make us red.
I would concur. I feel like most Californians are sort of like libertarian-ish people. Just my
Yes.
observation. Should we, will we, can we see the Epstein files?
Yes, I believe that we need to see Epstein files. What's the point of transparency when you say we're going to be transparent and then you're not? What is the point of not actually revealing, the sinisterness that has stolen the lives of these innocent children? I don't care who's on there. I care that they're exposed and then that they are dealt with. They don't get to live out in privacy. They don't get to live the life of luxury after they've engaged in such sickery, property that there's no consequence. Yes, the people have a right to see. We have a right to all the information because they've engaged in criminality, right? And for every crime, there has to be an in party. There are numerous injured parties. And I don't think that we're getting that transparency, if I'm being honest.
I'm with you there. I hope we get some more info on it. It's sad to see it, to hear that we're not going to see anything else, but we'll see what happens. Okay. Daniel Mercury, close us out. Give us your final words of wisdom and reason we should vote for you for California governor.
Well, Harrison, thank you again for allowing me to speak to the people of your audience. I think, in short, what I like to tell people is this. One is I believe firmly that prison is a solution for corrupt representatives. Nothing less will do. I'm not an individual who's here to lead you because I want to lead you. I want to serve you. I'm also of the mindset that I believe firmly that Californians are ready to return California to a golden state of mind. And I think under administration, you will see me starve the government, feed the people. And I think when it comes to the hardships, I think we need someone in office, and I believe I'm that candidate that will ensure that we experience freedom and ensure that freedom will always involve the hard truths, and I will always give it to you. And I think people believe firmly in my message, what I stand on, then I ask that you support me. I ask that you go to danielcalgovernor.com. So that's DANIEL 4 FOR Cal CAL governor.com. And I encourage you to click on one of my social media links, donate, download flyers, card magnets, bumpers, anything that you can do to spread my message and to get me out to the remaining cities that I haven't been able to hit would be greatly appreciated. If you are looking for extreme change, if you are looking to hold these individuals to indictment, prosecution, and imprisonment. I'm your candidate. That's it.
Thank you so much, man. I really hope you can save California and appreciate your time.
Thank you. And thank you so much again for having me on.
Save California, save the kids.